we just had a Shuso ceremony for our one of our priests here, and that brought up, all the memories of my own Shuso ceremony, which is, so wonderful to, such an honor to be able to have that kind of, responsibility, but also humility for being, as the first seat, but also you are the bottom seat also at the same time. And it was wonderful to be able to be in that practice period and that year as Shuso and also as Roshi's Jisha, just kind of taking care of the community here. We have a really wonderful resident community here. It's around 18 people right now. And when I was Shuso, it was much smaller because it was during the pandemic. But it's the same, you clean the toilets and you also just make sure everything is okay. And I think you asked the question of whether my, being a doctor also is helpful in the community. And yes, yes, it definitely is, especially through the pandemic. And I was, helping come up with the policies and ways of staying safe within the community and still have a residential community throughout the pandemic, and also just taking care of people's smaller problems that we don't want people to be out and about in the clinics at that time. So it was definitely helpful, but also they don't need me if I'm away. There's also the clinics and different things here and other people can help, but it's handy, like especially when people pass out in the Zendo, which sometimes happens. It just happened 2 days ago. And, sometimes people do, we have, pretty high altitude here at about 7,000 feet. And so sometimes people coming from lower altitudes and not used to the session schedule happen during session, people can, syncopize. And it was so funny because I kind of know that sound of someone falling down in the Zendo. And I was facing the wall, so I immediately turned around and people were like, "How did you know?" I was like, I just know that sound." But it's handy to have that skill for sure.
Yeah. So and it's mostly this like a combination of dehydration and maybe overexertion with
Yeah.
the altitude adjustment. And when someone does pass out, or when they fall onto the platform or off of the platform, or however it's structured for sesshin, how do you treat someone that has passed out?
Well, of course, I just make sure that nothing else is going on. If they're, no chest pain, they're not having other issues. If they're just syncopizing from being, low blood pressure or low blood sugar usually, or, high altitude, they're dehydrated, then I just let them lay down for a while and make sure everything else is good, and then just get them something to hydrate and help them. And this person just was fine after they got back up and went back into session. It's just sometimes the schedule also does that to you, or who knows? Session is a pretty different experience, especially for people who've never done it before.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is it's an intense environment, and you're also walking into a different environment altogether, with its altitude and all the different circumstances, and
Yeah.
schedule in general. Like you're not eating at the time that you usually eat, and so it's a little different.
Yeah.
And then
Most of
yeah,
it is just holding people and letting them know is totally normal, and not to feel shame, not to, sometimes people feel embarrassed, and there's no need to. So we just take care of people just as long as we make sure nothing else is going on. Yeah.
and I can certainly appreciate, just want to make sure that it's not something
Yeah.
that needs to be treated in a more
Yeah,
like an
exactly.
emergency way.
Yeah.
And then on the embarrassment note too, like I've never fallen off of the platform when I've sat zazen or anything, but I've come close. Like I've fallen asleep while sitting up, and then I just kind of feel myself
Ooh.
inception-y, like falling backwards, and
Yeah.
that'll startle you awake. But it's I appreciate you having this grace, where if you do have something that's very human happen while you're sitting, it's all right, because I get very self-conscious, even just the prospect of it. uh, and then on the injury note, I know Roshi Joan Halifax did recently shatter her elbow. Like what was that experience like, of kind of taking care of someone, like just in an emergency environment?
Yeah, we just came back from Asia. I just came back from Nepal. and she came back from Korea. We met in Hong Kong because that's where my family is, and we just met there for 5 days, and then came back to a very grueling schedule. We had the film opening about the Nomads clinic, one in Mill Valley in the Bay Area, and then also another one here in Santa Fe. So we were at the Q&As, we were, jet lagged. And so, she just kind of came off the small curb and fell onto her elbow. And she's totally fine now, but because we have a really wonderful friend who is a hand surgeon who took care of her pretty quickly, and she had surgery, and now she's good. I'm just, she's actually staying with me in my guest house because it's easier that way for me to take care, and that, we have a good relationship. And we were also the community was in session, so but it's wonderful to be able to do that with your teacher. It's, I've been working with Roshi for let's see, and since the end of 2019. And it's hard for me to see her, hurt, but it's wonderful that I could, be there and take care of her. But she's recovering well, so
Good. Yeah,
yeah.
and I'm very happy to hear that as far as the update. And I remember seeing this like photo. I think it was through Roshi's Instagram account, but there's a picture of her like with wraps around her arm, but she
Yeah.
just has this like very brilliant smile and clarity in her eyes and everything. Where accidents happen and they catch you off guard because they're surprising sometimes. And I just feel like I would be a little more haggard or like not quite picture ready. So it's just amazing to have this kind of uh, just this I don't know presence that happens even under such surprising and painful circumstances. And then as far as the treatment goes, where you kind of are able to apply your medical training in these situations, there's this interesting dynamic, at least to me, where here you are, you've been learning a lot from Roshi as a teacher,
Mhm.
and now they're staying in your guest house, and you're kind of tending to them as they recover and heal, and you're bringing your expertise in to help that individual who's helped you bring their expertise. What has
Mhm.
that exchange been like? I mean, have you learned something about patience, like the patient relationship with a medical person, having someone that is a trained and very established Zen person, kind of being able to explain their pain experience with you, and like what has their teaching kind of brought to how you do your bedside manner or your treatment in general?
Wow, it's such an amazing question with so many different layers. But like you said, I keep learning from how she works with difficulties, like these kind of physical difficulties, and having that kind of almost, dual, triple relationship with your with your teacher is different from, having a teacher be on a platform for sure. And I think that's just a much more humanizing way of learning, because you're learning day by day, and that's where the real transmission of knowledge comes from, of wisdom comes from. And I am just honored, and so it's such a um, rare experience to be able to be that close to a teacher. And yeah, I learn every day from, how she works with everything from her physical, issues like that that suddenly happened, and how she works with Upaya. Upaya is a very vibrant community, and everyone's like, "You're 82, you're still working so much," but she loves it. And there's like a passion there of just giving, of cultivating this relationship with these young people who are in our community, and also building this. We just have a new amazing building that finished last year, and all these amazing programs going on, and just seeing her working both the nitty-gritty part of it, the how where do we put the rails for the towels in the toilet, or to huge things like what do we do, what kind of programming we want to continue forward, what kind of, how we want to bring the Dharma forward. So just kind of watching that and absorbing how these things are done is very, very educational for me. Um, of course, as a physician, trained physician, I don't actually have any of these experiences in the past of running a Dharma center. So it's been quite an eye-opening experience. And for many, many years, Roshi had been running the Nomads clinic in Nepal. And this is the first year that Roshi didn't go. So we've been laughing and debriefing about that for the past few weeks since I got back. And I was like, Roshi, now I know all these things that you do that I didn't realize that I'm in charge of, you know? And so it's kind of like that, of like really seeing all the details of how these things come together, of that kind of diligence, that virya, all that patience that goes into, creating something like that. As a participant in a retreat, you just think that things just happen, right? You come to Upaya as a resident, you do all the things in your schedule, but you think that the lights just turn on. But there's a lot more that goes behind that I'm learning about. So it's really really wonderful.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I appreciate how you are getting so much from this person who can attend to the nitty gritty and then also kind of like have this like greater bird's eye view on the programming and the general thing that makes this feel so seamless. So when someone shows up, there's this kind of, oh, it's ready for me. Like I'm ready to do my work and not worry about a leaking pipe that's dripping right on my
Yeah.
my zafu or whatever it is. And yeah, so no, I absolutely hear that. And then yes, so what was your experience like with Upaya's Nomads Clinic this year? I mean, it sounds like it was different than last year or the years previous, and you had a little bit more of a leadership role. Like what was the experience like this year?
Yeah. We haven't gone since 2019, before the pandemic. And that was, it was probably like the 40th something year of the Nomads Clinic. And I've been going since 2016. So, I had gone 4 times before the pandemic. And on the second time, Roshi made me a co-director with some of a wonderful team. And the Nomads Clinic kind of is uh, has been an organic growth. Roshi was going on pilgrimage to these very high altitude places like Mount Kailash and Nepal and all of these places, and then realized that many of these communities don't have medical care. And there would sometimes be a doctor or a nurse on the pilgrimage with her, and they would just, provide whatever medical care that they can give. And so that slowly kind of grew into Roshi bringing more and more medical, professionals like nurses and doctors and acupuncturists and all kinds of different doctors, and then making connections as she went back again and again to these same communities with the local clinicians, and building this team of both clinicians and also local kind of guides and trekking team. And by the time I went in 2016, there were, I think, 20 some Western clinicians, plus quite a few Nepali clinicians together working as a team. And then she's been working with this trekking company, which are all basically good friends and family, over the years for many, many years. And then going back to some of the same communities over and over again. So by the time that I was going, it was very well established. All the communities up there, and especially Dolpo and Humla, knows about the Nomads Clinic and knows what kind of services that we provide, and we have a trust going on. And so this year, in 2019, since 2019, actually, when that film that I was talking about, the documentary, was filmed in 2019. So it just kind of came out. And if you have a chance to see it, I think it's going to come on stream soon. That gives you an idea of what the clinic is like. We go over these really high mountains and passes to get to these villages that are only accessible by foot because you have to go over these passes. And so we have, pack animals that carry the medical supplies. and a very well-established trekking team that guides us over these passes. And we would do clinics at these communities. So this year, because I know that Roshi probably wouldn't go as we were planning it, she was like, I've aged out. I'm 82. Last time I was 78 or 77, and I actually already aged out then, but I went anyway. But this time I'm not going to go. So I was like, oh no. So that means I have to work with all of these details. So as a team, we decided to mostly bring clinicians that's gone before this time, and also to go to one of our co-director is a amazing woman named Tsering Angmo. She's one of my best friends now, and she um, was a nurse who came down from one of these high villages that are at 13,500 feet, and got an education as a nurse in Kathmandu. And then after we met her, she had this wish to come to the US to study. And she just got her Master's of Public Health in University of Washington. And then she decided to go back. And so she's like the most important person on the team because she's the cultural bridge between us and also the people at the community. So we decided to go to her village to set up clinics, and also do other projects like the menstrual kit project, which is very, very well received, and women's health education. And also we wanted to involve the local clinicians and do education. And so we spent an entire day doing education with these like 10 nurses and health aides from the region. And also they were all translators. So we were able to do like bedside kind of teachings. So the difference this year was that it was a smaller team. It was more focus on education, and also kind of we did a listening session with the people in the villages to see what they really want us to bring back next year when we come back. And one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize is that to work with local clinicians. So we have a physician from that region, the second physician in the entire state. And he just graduated sometime during COVID, and he's never been back since then. So he came with us, and he was able to bring, what he's learned back to his people, which was wonderful. And we have this wonderful dentist who basically alleviates more suffering than all of us combined, because there's a lot of dental health issue up there, and they don't really get very good dental care. So many of them live with very painful dental issues for many years. So it was wonderful. And as far as what I learned, one of the most important thing that a bunch of clinicians can always forget when we're on a trip is that this is a pilgrimage. This is primarily a pilgrimage, even though we have the service component. We are on a pilgrimage. The region that we go to are all Tibetan Buddhist, and is like steeped in that religion, and the wonderful mountains are just majestic, and it is difficult to get to these places. And so every morning we would practice together, and we would have a Dharma discussion. And then, we would hold ourselves to this standard of pilgrimage, to remember that every step we take is on pilgrimage, to bring that sensibility and realize that, ourselves are getting transformed in this journey. And so it's always both sides. We're providing service, but we also realize that we're also healed from this journey, because many of the clinicians that go on this pilgrimage are burnt out from the Western medical system. And so being out there in the wild, doing this really hard thing, but with these beautiful, resilient people, giving back, and they're giving back to us, and learning from each other is so healing. For so many of our lives have been changed. So we have to keep remembering that. And Roshi, before we went, kept reminding us to make sure that this is something that's, that we talk about in our councils as we go along, and to keep practicing and keep remembering that we're there, not just as, medical providers, as we call them here, but also as part of the community, part of the mountain, and that we're actually in connection with the people in the mountains.
What an amazing thing that you and your team have done, and that the Upaya and Roshi have been doing for decades. And I'm just so grateful that there are people like yourselves that are doing such important work and offering so many uh, deeply fundamentally important services, and even including people that are from the communities that you're serving, that have been trained, and offering bridges and making sure that people are comfortable and that communication is happening, especially within the health, with administering healing, and making sure that people are taken care of while they're being taken care of, making sure that there's an
Yeah,
outlet for people to express themselves. And also
yeah,
and knowing that dentistry is like a part, it's not just
yeah,
checkups in the physician way that is like more general. It's like there are some specialists that need to come in and address some very important needs. So thank you very much for doing what you do and for offering these services, and may it also inspire others to go to needed communities, wherever they are. And it's amazing too that you share this experience where you are providing healing, you are providing resources and education for people to be able to address themselves the best they can when you are no longer holding clinic, when you have to return. But you're also having a healing with yourselves when you are out there. There is uh, a Buddhist element of a pilgrimage that you're walking, and as you're interacting with people. Uh, what is that like? Because you have experience working in emergency hospitals in New York and elsewhere in America. What is that experience like of when you were treating someone uh, here in America under the within a hospital, American hospital environment, and then when you are treating somebody in the Himalayas in Nepal, with this mindset of a pilgrimage? Like, is there something now that you've learned doing these clinics that you now bring back to the clinics that you help with in Santa Fe and elsewhere?
yeah. Well, I mean, it's what we were talking about. It's not a top-down kind of model in the Nomads clinic, and that's the model that we learn in medical education and how it's set up in the Western ways, right? So, a doctor comes in, we know it all. We're gonna, this is what we're gonna do. And in Nepal, you really learn to be with the culture. Also, because we can't do all the things that we can do in the hospital. And we also don't need to, worry about, insurance and and efficiency, and being evaluated by, that kind of like very Western mindset. We have time to kind of connect with the patient. Um, and also understand where culturally they come from and be part of that. And so, for example, this time, the one big learning for me is there was one patient who was dying. We and many of them don't want to come down to Kathmandu because they don't want to die away from their families. And so we did a house call, and we saw that she was really sick. And there's a, procedure that we could do, which is palliative, that makes it more comfortable for her, even though she's still dying, that we're not fixing anything. That we had discussed at length with the family members, and we finally decided we were going to do this because the family member really wanted it. But when we went to do the procedure, we saw that they were actually in the middle of doing a puja. The lama was there preparing, making the tormas that are made of sampa, and they haven't started the actual puja yet. But I remember coming in with my team. There were three of us, and my first thing I saw was that they were basically in the middle of a ceremony. Even though the puja hasn't started, preparing for the puja is part of the ceremony. The whole family was there. And they all saw us and they all stood up and started to leave. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. Because there's both, normally, as medical professionals in the United States, we come in with that patriarchal thing. Oh, we're the most important. Let's do this. You guys all leave. Um, and I was like, no, I don't want to interrupt this puja in that way. We need to be part of the ceremony. We needed to be part of that culture, that understanding of the disease process and what she's going through. So I asked the Lama if he would do a blessing for us. And so we all sat down and he did this really long, beautiful blessing of this prayer with all the family. And we told them that we know that what we're doing is not going to fix her. But we'll try the best we can to make her as comfortable as possible. And that, that we want to do the best we can in this situation. And so he did this long prayer, and then afterwards, the young people left, and we started to do this procedure. And that I think that is a huge learning for me to bring back to the United States, because um, the other person on the team who went to this this house call was my friend Dr. Dalton, Clay Dalton, and he works at Gallup in this where the Navajo Nation is, and he also learned from this that everybody is actually going through a journey and their own spiritual journey of their disease and dying. And instead of coming in as like a top-down patriarchal way of saying, okay, we're going to fix this is the most important, how do we actually enter into that ceremony of their journey? And how do we be part of that rather than be someone from the outside, an outside expert coming in and trying to fix things? And that was something that I really saw in that moment. And that's something I will bring in to, right now I'm not practicing clinical medicine at the moment, but when I do, and even when, I'm helping or serving people here, that's something that I want to bring in to that my awareness that there's something else going on. This person is in their own journey and their own ceremony. How do I enter that humbly rather than coming from above?
That's an incredible insight for myself to hear, just because that there is this I participate in an American medical system. I just as a patient, I'm not a physician, and there is this equality where when a patient, depending on what they're getting treated for, there is this diagnosis, and then there's a plan. There's some decision making, but there isn't a whole lot of time, from what it feels like, to have somebody really kind of meet you where you are in your life, and to have like a an openness to a profound connection that can happen. And to know where someone's suffering, and to meet them there is such a powerful thing. And I'm really glad that you've taken this experience, and you're bring it into your work. Should you do more clinical work, or just as you help people in your life? I think that's a really wonderful thing. And two, there's this thing that is going on where, with your journey to Nepal, doing these clinics, as you said, you're walking, paths that can't be traversed with a vehicle necessarily, or you have like animals, pack animals that are helping you wind and weave through these probably relatively tight and cliff facing trails. And you're
Yes.
you're doing all these different, hard things, and not to mention the altitude, not to mention your schedule, as we talked about, is not really up to you, and dehydration, various things that are happening. And I mean, I've seen some pictures of Upaya's Nomads clinic, and you're camping sometimes. You're
We're
intense,
always camping. Yeah.
always camping.
Yeah.
And I I really admire this ability of you and your teams to show up for that type of experience and then wake up and be available to help other people. And not to mention, it's not just this direct uh, top down kind of scenario where you just go ahead and just apply your knowledge. You're also having these bridge conversations. You're having these, making sure that people are taken care of in a full way, and humbling yourself. That's also hard too. Like you're already kind of out and about in your mind, and that there's a lot of things that your body's going through while you're doing that. So there's just this amazing thing, that quality that goes through this. And I feel this may or may not tie in with your book, Inner Practice of Medicine, where you are encouraging physicians to apply some techniques of self-care and self-regulation, and just making sure that the burnout doesn't happen. What what was your experience like doing Upaya's Nomad Clinic, and experiencing any? I don't know if you experienced any burnout, but what is something that you learned from that experience that you can connect to your work, that you're trying to bring to physician communities in America?
Yeah, definitely. Nomads Clinic was probably one of the reasons why I'm actually here today, with my head shaved. I In 2016, when I found Nomads Clinic, I was burned out. I was a ER doc on the East Coast, and I remember coming back from one of my shifts that was quite difficult, and looking on the internet for anything that could help me. I was already had a meditation practice. I had a teacher in a different tradition, but I always kept feeling that my meditation practice and my spiritual path is completely separate from my medical path, which, I knew that they shouldn't be, but I didn't know how to bridge them, because in medicine, there's so many pressures of, like we said, efficiency on, how we learned how to be, that patriarchal model. And working in New York, especially, was so busy. You just don't have time to think about it once you walk through the doors of the emergency department. I didn't have time to think about it, and I kept feeling like I'm actually getting worse at my. I was getting more expert in my work, like the actual doing of the medicine, but I felt like I was actually getting less patient. I was getting, more anxious. I was just more unhappy. And I was like, but my meditation practice should really actually make me more patient, right? Which there was like a disconnect. And so I was also interested in, death and dying, that process, and what we can learn from death and dying, and that journey that all of us face. I mean, that's a very quintessential like Zen question, right? Like the um, birth and death. And so I found Roshi Joan actually online and saw that she was doing these programs. One is called Grace, that I talk about in my book, and also Being with Dying, which is specifically for clinicians, about our views on death and how we can bring, how are we going to treat patients who are facing their own death if we're deathly afraid. um, and that anxiety that we would bring into the room. How do we look at that? And and then I saw Nomads Clinic. So I was like, oh, I need to go on this. And so that's how I found Upaya in the beginning, is that I wanted to do all of these things. So I signed up for everything at the same time. And so the Nomads Clinic, when I went, 2016, was really uh, an initiation into a different way of looking at medicine. I didn't understand what compassion is. I mean, I'm still learning. But that kind of real life application of spiritual concepts into my work in medicine was the first time I was able to actually experience it.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you had this experience where uh you were able to act on this joining this initiation phase where you are able to throw yourself fully into something where you are developing yourself, you're developing your compassion, but you're developing yourself again. I mean, like the burnout is very real. I mean, again, I'm not a physician, but I know ER rooms are some of the most intense that you can be in. And I'm glad that you took care of yourself in that moment, and that you're able to take all these things that you've been learning and developing within your Zen practice, but also to just as you continue to work with people with the Nomads Clinic, that you were able to write something to help to offer people, especially in the pandemic times and post-pandemic times of just like when burnout was just that was national news. The burnout
Yeah.
was all over the
Well, it's
place.
still going on, actually. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe there's less being talked about in the media, but that is actually worse. It's actually has not, people have not recovered from, how they were burnt out in COVID. And then now suddenly they're back in that, that churn. And it's getting even worse because, there's private equity that's taken over medicine, and the pressure of time and of making money for the system, all of that is still happening and getting worse. So I think this work is even more important. And, with the Nomads Clinic, that the part about healing ourselves is so important. And so that's why next year we will open it up and take a few more clinicians who have never been, because it's healed all of us. And also the programs that go on here, the the book kind of spurned a program now at Upaya. And last year we had 30 physicians um, joining, and none of them are Zen people, but they're all looking for something to help them continue to serve in medicine in the West. All of them, it's a huge diverse group we had. We had like everywhere from a med student all the way to someone who's like nearly retiring, to all kinds of specialties. Usually back in the day when we had clinician programs, we only had like, the palliative care docs and the internal medicine docs. Now there's like orthopedics, OB-GYN, there's like a medical examiner, there is a whole wide range of clinicians, because we all need this kind of work. The work itself can be so meaningful, of course. We're in service. What better thing can there be? But then there's all these other pressures that make it so that our service is no longer something that is in the center. And we feel, you know, that our core of our desire to serve has been taken away. So how do we reconnect with that? And so that's what all these the book is about and the program is about. And a lot of it is actually Buddhist,
Mhm.
but we don't, but as you know, but we don't, a lot of, not everybody is Buddhist coming to the programs, and it's totally fine, because the principles apply and people can feel it in their bones. And that's what the book really, what I was trying to do with it, was to have people feel into these kind of Buddhist principles, um, and feel that, feel the need to connect in that way with others. And doing this work, it doesn't, it doesn't have to look Buddhist, but it's just the principles of, compassion is, universal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it is amazing too. I don't know how many other Buddhist centers or uh, I guess organizations are doing what Upaya is doing, but I'm just very glad to hear that Upaya is doing what it's doing, where it is offering opportunities for physicians, especially that are facing this long-term burnout that you mentioned. I don't think that the the media these days is covering the emergency room or the medical professional burnout the same way it had in the past couple years. It's not there's so much in the news, but
Yeah,
that
there's so much
I don't
to
know if that's
cover.
yeah.
Yeah.
But and it deserves a light to be shown on it. So thank you for offering that, and that UPI is doing so much to bring people in, that are maybe not Buddhist, maybe aren't necessarily even spiritual, but they can take some of these tools and techniques to help better themselves, so they can go back to this very important work of service.
They're all
So,
spiritual though, really,
mm,
we're all spiritual.
mm,
Especially people who are in that kind of service work, even if they don't articulate it, there is, a spiritual side that is in there. So that's the part that connects.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what maybe draws them to serving people the
Yeah,
way that they do in
exactly.
such a fundamental way.
Yeah.
And as far as your spirituality, because I know that you had mentioned before you were connected to the Nomads Clinic that you had a teacher in another tradition. If you feel comfortable, like what was your spiritual path kind of growing up? Did Buddhism overall kind of click into what you were looking for in a spiritual path early on, or did you kind of explore a lot of different faith traditions as you got there?
I explored quite a bit. I think I was actually averse to Buddhism because it's in the culture that I grew up in. As I'm Chinese and my family's in Hong Kong, they are not Buddhist, but it's kind of in the culture, and it feels a little too close to home. Like as we grow up, sometimes we have to go away first. And so actually, I have been on and off meditating since you know, uh, probably college. But then what really got me was actually medical school. That first year of medical school, I suddenly realized that I needed something else. I didn't know how to articulate it. I know that going into medicine means that I need to connect with better with this spiritual thing. I don't know what it was. So I kind of went around and explored quite a bit and set up just my own meditation practice daily. I don't know what I was doing. I was just reading books. And at the end of medical school, I found a teacher who was in the Siddha yoga tradition, and he was wonderful. And I went on many Indian pilgrimages with him. Uh, and that really helped me open to more than just the science of medicine. But like I said, I still didn't know how to connect the two. So that's finally when I found Roshi Joan. I was still not bought into Buddhism because it still felt too close. But then I started going to all these programs, the Being with Dying program, the Grace program, and then I actually started doing the chaplaincy program, which is the Buddhist chaplaincy program. After I've been to Nomads, and that is actually one of the most wonderful programs I've ever done, including like all my educational experience in all the other schools. It's so comprehensive. It talks about, we learned, it's based on Buddhism, but we learn everything from systems theory to, how to pray, with people to, environmental chaplaincy to prison chaplaincy to, to regular hospital chaplaincy. Basically, how do we come alongside suffering?
Yeah,
And it's a 2-year program, and that's how I kind of got more and more inducted into the Buddhism, and that's how at the end of the Nomads Clinic in 2019, I ended up back in Santa Fe because I couldn't stand living in a city anymore, and I was just gonna check it out here, and then all of a sudden the pandemic happened, and I just kind of got stuck here. and and then I started like helping out with the COVID policies at Upaya, and then started going up to the mountains with Roshi. We have Roshi has a retreat site that is private up in the mountains at 9,400 feet. And at that point, because I was kind of in charge of the COVID policies, we at that time we didn't know what was going on. It was before the vaccine, so we wanted to get Roshi away to keep her safe, and that's how I ended up going to the refuge. We called it the Prajna Refuge, the mountain refuge, and staying up there in a cabin. And then we started staying longer, and basically spent the whole of the pandemic there. And that's where I wrote my book. That's where, that's how we ended up adopting a dog, and then all of a sudden I'm ordained. I don't even know what happened. Things just
Wow.
happen.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But you took all that isolation time. You took that that time that everyone had to deal with during the pandemic of that alone time. And it wasn't just, the expressions that a lot of people did of like sourdough or, whatever it is, which is all great. People became very creative and adventurous with their new lifestyle. But you did have this ability to deepen practice, work very much more closely with your teacher, write a book. I mean, these really, really wonderful things that have, I think, positively manifested and then have brought so much to your life, but also through you to others. So I'm very appreciative of your use of that time and to protect and to um, sustain the Upaya Sangha. So I'm very happy for that, and I'm also very happy to hear about the introduction of your dog, the dog that came into your life. Is it Jaya? Is that right? How you
Yeah, yeah,
Jaya? Yeah.
yeah.
I've seen some videos of Jaya leaping and bounding in a
Yeah.
wonderful, beautiful forest and plain. And what has your experience been like having a dog like this in your life? It seems like a very special dog. So I was
Very
curious about
special
it.
dog.
Yes,
She's
yeah.
also very, a handful, but she's, we basically I was just looking for a dog, and then weighing the options. I don't know if you remember, at that time, all the shelters were empty because everybody was adopting dogs. So, so I was thinking about, just maybe buying a dog, and Roshi's like, no, you have to rescue one. So we just kind of like got on the list of the Santa Fe shelter, and she was the only dog that I saw. And we drove down from the refuge, was an hour and 40 minutes from Santa Fe to the shelter, saw her, and I just bonded immediately. We both just bonded immediately, and then took her directly up to the mountains. And she's never seen that much space before, so we let her out of the car, and she was like, "What?" And started running around like, "Wow, this is all space for me to run." So we didn't even own a leash for the first 6 months. So, but that
Wow.
was, yeah, and it's just like the joy. It's just so joyful seeing her so free, and it kind of reflects on my experience out in the wilderness too, because I, uh, you know, have always lived in big cities. I was in, grew up in Hong Kong till I was 15. I lived in San Francisco. I lived in New York City for many years. And so that kind of slowing down and just observing the seasons go by. I would sit on the porch with my computer to write the book, but they're just kind of sitting there over a few years, watching the leaves change, seeing the grass grow. That kind of slowing down at first. I mean, I had a bit of like, that city anxiety. I'm like, what else should I do next? But then suddenly, slowly, my nervous system slowed down, and that's the just chopping wood and carrying water, literally, helped me just slow down to a point where I felt like I am actually located rather than running around. And I think that Zen teaching is actually such an embodied teaching that I mean, you read it, I read it when I was in New York. I'm like, okay, chop wood and carry water. But actually experiencing that kind of slowing down, just suddenly all of these teachings made more sense. Um, and it was just, you know, a, a privilege to be able to do that. And then having Roshi be there to, I could reflect, what I was learning, and learning from her how she is out in the wilderness too was a blessing.
Oh wow. Well, I'm so happy to hear that. And what you're saying resonates a lot with me. I'm very much city based, and I've lived in New York. I spent a lot of my 20s in New York. What an exciting place. What
It
a
is.
draining place. I mean,
Yes.
I feel like there's something about New York where even while you sleep, just maybe the energy underneath you with the subways or whatever it is, it just feels like it's just like dripping some of your energy out of you just a little bit. I don't know. It's not necessarily like especially when when I was there in my 20s, I had tons of energy and I used as much of it as I could, but there was always this little like kind of sapping that you're like you're never quite resting. And
No.
and then yeah, like that literally, it's popular to say, touch grass right now. And I think that, when you get out of the city, you go up to the Hudson Valley or whatever it is, you touch grass and you're like, oh yeah. And then where I am in San Francisco, there are all kinds of hawks and all that. And every time I see or engage with nature, it grounds me in a way that is it's like, oh yeah, there's like way more than taking a bus or doing living a city life. There's an alternative way of moving in this world that I don't quite do, but a bird sure can. And like there's something about that. And so watching, like, there's this beautiful thing about people watch some of these videos of your dog jumping around so freely, where you get to see something, enjoying it in that moment, and then also too, to your point as well about watching the seasons change very slowly,
Yeah.
and feeling that grain of a wood, of a stump that you're about to split into various shapes and sizes, and carrying that cold water and all that. It's like there is something about that that is tethers you
Hmm.
to something that's always moving and changing, but it's there nonetheless and very, very profoundly real. So I'm very glad that you have these experiences. And do you find that when it comes to the natural environment, like I know that mushrooms are something that you're good at locating, or you're good at kind of hunting for and finding some beautiful oyster mushrooms and all that. And I know that we talked earlier about being with dying and things like that. And the natural run of things, I guess, is that fungus usually shows up when things are starting to decompose and all that. Is there do mushrooms hold a special place in your life at all?
Well, actually, I mean, I just like to observe them. I'm not a very good gatherer. I don't trust myself other than the very obvious ones like the oysters. It's just because of my medical background, I'm super careful with that. But it's just, observing when different things come up in the ground. And then noticing. I never noticed when I was in New York when the leaves changed. I'm like, all of a sudden one day I look up, I'm like, oh yeah, there are no leaves on the tree. Oh right, it's winter. But like kind of noticing, like, oh, it's springtime, you see the wild irises first, they die. Then you see the columbines come up and then they die. And then a little later, when it's wet, you see the mushrooms come up in the forest and then they go away. And then the leaves of the aspens change. And then and then you notice that the light changes. It feels different. The quality of the light is different through each season. And you know, the sense of impermanence is there. That's, in New York, all the buildings are just always like that there. I mean, yes, there's impermanence, but there's a false sense of permanence. But in nature, it's there all the time. Things change continuously, and you just kind of notice it, and it's part of the practice. I love sitting outside during zazen at just right when the light starts going down, and listening to the sounds. You hear all the birds going crazy right before the sun goes down, like just chirping and finding their way back home. And then as the light slowly dims, it suddenly becomes completely quiet. And then you just sit in that space of quietness, and then the moon rises, or sometimes you hear a rustling of something in the far, and then you don't know what it is, and you're like, ah. But it's all kind of noticing the changes as things go along, that when you're in a controlled environment in the city with the AC blaring, the temperature is always the same, the sounds are always just that buzz of the, or sometimes the honking or whatever. It's different. It's wonderful to have that experience of having an extended time in the wilderness and practicing out there.
Absolutely. And I do know that there are people that have what seems like a very vibrant and thriving practice, in cities that are big like London or in New York and all that. But there is just something when you need it, or when you like personally might feel like it's necessary to have those moments of quiet, and like to let yourself be scared of that rustling, because there is
Yeah.
something very discomforting about that. But there's also something very deep, like it did something that you did instinctively almost. It's
Yeah.
like I am fearful out of instinct. I don't know what that
Right.
was. And it's
Yeah.
amazing also, just quick side note, it's amazing how much noise a squirrel can make. And you're like, oh my God, what was
It's
that?
very loud. Yeah.
You're like, clearly that's a deer. And you're like, no, that's a 9-inch squirrel that just is like running around. So
Yeah.
but yeah, anyway, so I absolutely hear that. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I just had two more open questions towards the end, which are one, if there's anything that you have to promote, because I know that you have Inner Practice of Medicine as a book that's out, and but I don't know if there's anything else project wise that you're working on, or foundation or cause wise, that you'd want to bring more energy towards. And also too, is there any advice that you'd want to give to somebody uh, that at any point along the Buddhist path that you would have wanted to have heard when you were kind of coming through?
Hmm. I'll answer the second question first. Um, I think is to let yourself deepen. I think that's one of the most important things into whatever um, that draws you in the beginning. I mean, I spent a lot of time exploring in different traditions, and all that is well and good, but at some point, if you letting myself just kind of settle into one tradition, then you can change it at some point. But just really doing the practices like for an extended period of time in that way, and letting yourself deepen in that way rather than kind of shopping too much around, I think is very helpful. Of course, if you find that that tradition or whatever that practice doesn't, do anything for you, then you can eventually, change. But without that time of and patience of just kind of dropping into a particular practice, it's really difficult to tell what's going on. I think I am like all city people, I really wanted to like just do everything. But being trapped here during the pandemic and just kind of letting myself, I was like, oh well, I'm here. I guess I'll do the Zen thing. So letting myself kind of settle into that was very helpful. And then because Zen is the way it is, it's like it's very spare, and I was able to let go a lot of the habits and maybe techniques that I was using in practice that is not really necessary anymore, and just dropping into kind of learning how to just sit was tremendously helpful for me. So give yourself time and experiment deeply rather than everywhere.
Absolutely. And I find that what you're saying is resonating with me, where sometimes I'll show up, and I'm about like a couple years into my developing my practice, and it's become more formal as time goes on, and I'm definitely deepening it. But there are often times, surprisingly often times, where I'll be sitting down, be like, huh, like what am I doing? I'm doing this. I'm doing this thing. And it's not necessarily like what am I doing? Or
Mhm.
it's not necessarily a qualitative thing where it's like I'm not getting necessarily anything out of it. I certainly am. But I'll sit down, I'm like, wow, I'm really showing up and doing this Zen thing. And like there might be a cognitive dissonance, not necessarily in a negative or positive way, but just kind of this, I look around and I observe that my body has shown up for me. Like I'm literally
Mm,
sitting facing a wall,
mm.
and my mind's like, what are you doing? And then my body's like, we're sitting, and this is how we roll today. And then I move on from that. But I so that allowing yourself to have these conversations, I think, is really important,
Mhm,
and allowing yourself the time to deepen is, and to like, well, why are you asking that question? Well, ask the question, and then keep going in this direction. If it's, so long as it's fulfilling, keep going.
mhm,
um that's a wonderful wonderful thing to hear. And then did you have any kind of like cause or foundation? I do want to draw attention to your book, Inner Practice of Medicine, but if there's anything else that's coming up for you, or for Upaya in general, or just anything, I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, so many things. But inner practice of medicine, there's a program that's happening again the second time in beginning of July, and it's for physicians only. And we would love to see all kinds of physicians come. Last year we had 30, and we're trying to get funding for some scholarships for younger clinicians or physicians, like medical students or residents, to come, and that's one cause. And also for more BIPOC physicians to come, and that's what we had that last year, and it was just wonderful to have the diversity of experience. And then Nomads Clinic, definitely, we are planning on going next year. The menstrual kit fund is up and still running. And also, if you go on Upaya's website on the donate, you can donate directly to the Nomads Clinic for all of these kind of efforts, including, people's when we evacuate people from the villages, to give them a higher level of medical care in Kathmandu. Right now, we have a 13-year-old from one of the villages who has a kidney problem that we're treating in Kathmandu. Stuff like that we use the fund for. And so many, check out Upaya's website. There's so many amazing programs, including other programs for clinicians, like the Being with Dying, the chaplaincy, the Grace program, which is open to non-clinicians, is a Roshi's compassion training, and it's really wonderful. And we have all kinds of programs, like, on election day, we'll have the Zenda open, and we'll all sit together. And Awakened Action is an amazing program with Christiana Figueres, Roshi, just Rebecca Solnit, amazing women talking about climate and how we will work with that. And just check out the website. There's all kinds of different things. We're very, very broad and all about Dharma, but bringing it in different ways to different people. So, yeah,
Absolutely, and the website really does have a lot, like, where you can kind of and
yeah,
I appreciate you going into detail about it, because then you know where you can donate, and
yeah,
also the different programs that you can get into. So thank
yeah,
you for offering that, and
yeah.
again for doing all your work, both as and maybe inherently both as a Zen priest, but also as someone that is a medical professional trying to take care of people, whether they are patients, in whether they know it or not, whether they are physicians that are facing burnout,
Yeah.
or if they are patients that are in need of care, and trying to humble yourself, and your ability to humble yourself and bring yourself fully to caring for them in their spiritual ceremony, where in their healing journey, wherever they are, meeting them where they are. It's just really wonderful. Dainin, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate
Thank you
you
so much.
taking the time, and I'm going to look out for that Upaya Nomads Clinic film, streaming or otherwise, and
Mm.
I'll be sure to look out for it. And thank you again for what you do, and for offering so many wonderful outlets for people to deepen, and also to maybe connect with that fundamental spirituality that they may or may not recognize for themselves. So thank you.
And thank you so much for your work, for bringing all this to light. Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
of course, of course. I'm very grateful to have someone like yourself on to speak about it. So thank you.